By the time Amy Lynn Bradley was officially reported missing, a series of critical decisions had already shaped the outcome of the case. In the early hours following her disappearance, the Rhapsody of the Seas was not immediately placed under lockdown. No shipwide announcement was made to alert passengers or crew members that a young woman was missing. Daily operations continued as if nothing unusual had occurred. Passengers were allowed to move freely throughout the ship. Crew members were permitted to continue their duties without restriction. No coordinated emergency response was initiated during the crucial early window. Most significantly, the ship was allowed to remain on its scheduled course. This decision would later become one of the most heavily criticized aspects of the entire investigation. Despite the Bradley family's repeated pleas, the captain declined to delay docking. At approximately 8 o'clock that morning, the Rhapsody of the Seas arrived in Curaçao as planned. When the ship reached port, thousands of passengers disembarked. Many would never be seen again by investigators. Crew members were also free to leave the vessel, some as part of routine crew rotations, others temporarily while the ship was docked. With that single decision, any realistic opportunity to preserve the ship as a controlled environment was lost. The Bradley family begged ship officials to initiate a full emergency search before docking. They asked that passengers be accounted for. They requested that crew members be questioned immediately. Their requests were denied. Instead, the cruise line's initial explanation was that Amy Lynn Bradley had likely fallen overboard during the night. This conclusion raised serious concerns among investigators and family members alike. Amy was not inexperienced around water. She was a trained lifeguard and a confident swimmer who understood ocean safety. Friends and family consistently stated that she was cautious and responsible, not reckless. The physical design of the balcony further complicated the theory. The railing was chest-high, making an accidental fall unlikely without unusual movement or force. Equally troubling was the lack of physical evidence. No one on the ship reported hearing a splash. No alarms were triggered. No signs of a fall were observed on the exterior of the vessel. Inside the cabin, Amy's belongings told a different story. Her identification, money, shoes, and personal items were all left behind. Even her cigarettes, which family members said she rarely went without, remained untouched. These details made the idea of a spontaneous, accidental fall difficult to accept. Despite these inconsistencies, the cruise line maintained its position. By the time local authorities and federal investigators became fully involved, valuable time had been lost. The ship had already docked, and potential witnesses had dispersed across multiple countries and jurisdictions. Investigators later acknowledged that the delayed response severely compromised the case. Key witnesses may have left the ship without ever being identified. Surveillance opportunities were missed. Any physical evidence that might have existed was never secured. And if Amy Lynn Bradley had been taken off the ship alive, the opportunity to intervene had passed during those first critical hours. For the Bradley family, the handling of the situation was devastating. They believed that if immediate action had been taken, if the ship had been sealed and an emergency response launched, the outcome might have been very different. Instead, they were left with unanswered questions and a growing belief that the truth had slipped away during the narrow window when it still could have been uncovered. As investigators continued to examine the circumstances surrounding Amy Lynn Bradley's disappearance, attention began to shift away from the theory of an accidental fall and toward a far more disturbing possibility: human trafficking. The Caribbean has long been identified as a region affected by international trafficking networks. Its geography, combined with heavy tourism and limited coordination between jurisdictions, has historically made it vulnerable to exploitation. Cruise ships, in particular, present unique challenges. They carry thousands of passengers, operate under international maritime law, and employ multinational crews who frequently rotate between ports. This environment creates opportunities for crimes that are difficult to investigate and even harder to prosecute. In Amy's case, multiple witness accounts suggested she was seen alive after she was last confirmed to be on her cabin balcony. Several individuals reported encounters with a woman matching Amy Lynn Bradley's description in the hours and days following the ship's arrival in Curaçao. These sightings shared common details. The woman appeared frightened or disoriented. She was often accompanied by men who closely monitored her movements. Attempts to speak with her were interrupted or discouraged. In one account, a member of the United States Navy claimed he encountered a woman who identified herself as Amy Bradley while he was on shore leave in Curaçao. According to his statement, the woman told him she was being held against her will and needed help. Before the sailor could gather additional information, men accompanying her intervened and removed her from the area. The sailor later reported the encounter to his superiors and to investigators. Although the account could not be conclusively verified, investigators noted that the details he provided were specific and consistent. Over the years, similar reports continued to surface across multiple Caribbean locations. In Barbados, a woman reported being approached in a public restroom by someone who claimed to be Amy Lynn Bradley. The woman appeared distressed and asked for help before being escorted away by men who prevented further contact. Other sightings followed a similar pattern. Individually, these accounts could be dismissed as cases of mistaken identity. Collectively, they raised serious concern. The theory of human trafficking gained further attention years later when photographs appeared on an adult website operating in the Caribbean. The images depicted a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Amy, including tattoos similar to those she was known to have. The photographs were reviewed by the Bradley family and by federal investigators. While they could not be definitively confirmed as Amy Lynn Bradley, the resemblance was strong enough that authorities did not dismiss them outright. At the same time, investigators continued to examine the cruise line's alternative explanation. According to the cruise line, Amy had fallen overboard during the early morning hours. This explanation remained problematic. No physical evidence supported a fall. No body was recovered. No witnesses heard a splash or observed unusual movement. Investigators also questioned why personal belongings were left behind if Amy had voluntarily gone onto the balcony with the intention of returning inside. The FBI ultimately classified Amy Lynn Bradley's disappearance as a missing person case involving suspected foul play. This classification was significant. It indicated that federal investigators did not believe the evidence supported a simple accident. Instead, they acknowledged the possibility that Amy had been abducted and transported off the ship during or shortly after docking. For the Bradley family, this conclusion reinforced their belief that Amy was taken from the ship alive, and that someone somewhere knew what had happened to her. What? For Amy Lynn Bradley's family, the investigation did not end when official searches slowed. Her father, Ron Bradley, dedicated years of his life to finding his daughter. He traveled throughout the Caribbean, followed leads, distributed flyers, and met with anyone who claimed to have information. He spoke publicly about Amy's case whenever possible, refusing to let her disappearance fade from public attention. Ron Bradley believed that as long as sightings continued, there was hope that Amy was still alive. In 2009, Ron Bradley passed away without ever learning what happened to his daughter. Amy's mother, Iva Bradley, and her brother Brad have continued to advocate for her case. The FBI still lists Amy Lynn Bradley as a missing person and offers a reward for information leading to her recovery. Despite decades of investigation, no arrests have been made. No one has been charged. Amy Lynn Bradley's disappearance remains one of the most haunting, unsolved cases connected to a cruise ship. Her case exposed serious weaknesses in how missing persons cases are handled in international waters and raised lasting concerns about passenger safety at sea. More than 25 years later, the questions remain unanswered. What truly happened aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas in the early morning hours of March 24, 1998? Was Amy Lynn Bradley taken off the ship alive? Until those questions are answered, the search for truth continues. As the years passed, Amy Lynn Bradley's disappearance became more than just a single missing person case. It became a case study in the dangers and limitations of cruise ship safety and international maritime law. Cruise ships operate under complex legal structures. Many are registered in countries different from where their passengers live. When a crime occurs at sea, jurisdiction can become unclear, delaying investigations and limiting accountability. In Amy's case, this complexity worked against her family. The ship was not required to follow the same missing person protocols that would apply on land. There was no immediate lockdown, no mandatory passenger count, and no rapid coordination with international authorities. By the time multiple agencies became involved, critical time had already been lost. Amy's disappearance prompted increased scrutiny of how cruise lines handle emergencies. Advocacy groups began pushing for improved onboard surveillance, clearer reporting procedures, and stronger cooperation with law enforcement. Some changes were eventually made across the industry, including better tracking systems and clearer emergency response guidelines. But for the Bradley family, these changes came too late. Amy's case also highlighted how vulnerable passengers can be in international waters, particularly young women traveling far from home. Unlike crimes on land, incidents at sea can vanish without witnesses, physical evidence, or clear investigative authority. This reality has left many families with unanswered questions, much like the Bradleys. More than 2 decades later, Amy Lynn Bradley's disappearance continues to be discussed, investigated, and revisited. New tips still come in, sightings are still reported, and each report renews hope, even as it raises more questions. For investigators, the case remains open. For the public, it remains unsettling. And for Amy's family, it remains deeply personal. They continue to believe that someone, somewhere, knows the truth about what happened aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas. Until that truth is revealed, Amy Lynn Bradley's story stands as a reminder of how easily a life can disappear, and how difficult it can be to find answers when it does. Her disappearance is not just a mystery, it is a warning, and it is a case that refuses to be forgotten. As time passed, Amy Lynn Bradley's disappearance began to attract broader attention beyond her family and investigators. Media coverage of the case increased, bringing national and international focus to what had happened aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas. Each new report introduced Amy's story to audiences who had never heard her name before. With that attention came an influx of tips. Some were vague, others were detailed. Many were ultimately unsubstantiated, but a small number were compelling enough to warrant further investigation. Law enforcement agencies acknowledged that while many sightings could not be confirmed, the volume and consistency of reports distinguished Amy's case from typical missing person investigations. The recurring theme was always the same: a woman matching Amy's description, visible distress, limited freedom of movement, men controlling her interactions. For investigators, this pattern was difficult to ignore. It aligned with known methods used in trafficking operations, particularly in regions with heavy tourism and limited oversight. Despite this, proving such crimes is exceptionally difficult. Victims are often moved frequently. Identities are altered. Fear and coercion prevent communication. And without direct evidence, cases stall. Amy's case illustrates these challenges clearly. There is no definitive proof of what happened to her after the ship docked. There is no confirmed sighting that can be validated beyond doubt. Yet, there is also no evidence that she fell overboard. This absence of proof on either side has left the case suspended in uncertainty. For the Bradley family, this uncertainty has been the most painful aspect. Without answers, there can be no closure. Without confirmation, hope never fully disappears. Over the years, Amy's story has been shared by investigators, journalists, and advocates not only as a mystery, but as a warning. It has prompted discussions about cruise ship security, passenger safety, and the responsibilities of companies operating in international waters. Some changes have been implemented across the industry, including improved surveillance systems and clearer reporting protocols. But critics argue these measures came only after tragedies forced attention. Amy Lynn Bradley's disappearance remains one of the most cited examples of how vulnerable passengers can be when crimes occur far from land, witnesses, and immediate jurisdiction. More than 2 decades later, her case is still referenced by investigators studying missing persons at sea. New leads are still reviewed, new tips are still logged, and the case remains officially open. For the public, Amy's disappearance remains unsettling. For investigators, it remains unresolved. And for her family, it remains deeply personal. Until clear evidence emerges, Amy Lynn Bradley's fate will remain unknown. But her story continues to be told, not just to remember what happened, but to prevent it from happening again. No one has been charged. Amy Lynn Bradley's disappearance remains one of the most haunting unsolved cases involving a cruise ship. Her case exposed serious flaws in cruise ship safety protocols and highlighted the vulnerability of passengers in international waters. More than 25 years later, the questions remain. What truly happened in the early morning hours aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas? Was Amy Lynn Bradley taken off the ship alive? And if so, Where did she go? Until those questions are answered, the case remains open, and the search for truth continues.